This episode of Suds with Luds is brought to you by Early Bird Gummies. Early Bird Gummies are a recreational hemp product and contain 2.5 milligrams of natural THC and 12.5 milligrams of CBD in each gummy. They are formulated with a microdose of THC and are designed to make you feel good. We often say that Early Bird will put a smile on your face and are great for taking the edge off. The Suds with Luds discount code is SUDS, S-U-D-S. Good for 20% off a customer's first purchase. For me, take them at bedtime. Helps me get a great sleep at night. Try our Early Bird Gummies. Well, welcome into another episode of Suds with Luds. Today is a unique special guest. I don't want to call Scott Burnside an insider because I don't know. I think maybe Elliot Friedman has that to himself. But Scott, you are a jack of all trades. First off, I thank you very much for coming on, and we're going to talk a lot of things about the NHL. And apparently, from what I understand, is you're an expert at 32 teams in the NHL. And welcome.
Well, I'm honored to be there, and I will say that I love your logo, and I'm just sad it's taken this long for you to call me. It must be you must have hit a dry spell in the Rolodex.
Actually,
Right?
no,
I'm just a little disappointed it's taken this long.
No, I went with players. So to be honest with you, my first show was with Mike Heika, one of your old colleagues, I believe, Dallas Stars. But I started with Mike because that was in the summer, one of our first shows, and so I wanted to get his take on what was happening in the offseason with the team. And then we kind of rolled into a bunch of old guys, Carbonneau, and I got Matt Vachuk coming on. I had Verd Fiddler, Razor, your buddy, Daryl Ray came on. And naturally, all I had to do was ask like two questions, and an hour and a half went by like that. So I want to start off here with I don't want to say sad news, which it is obviously, is we lost a member of the NHL family here in Peter McNabb, and I know you've probably had some a bunch of dealings, and you've known Peter probably, my guess is, for a long time. I just wanted you to kind of reflect back on Peter, and he was an incredible broadcaster for the Avalanche, and I thought he did a hell of a job, and I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's very sad, and this, Craig, from not just from being a longtime player and then being part of the broadcast community, and in a couple of different ways with the Stars, and the connection with so many in that community, and I just every time you came across Peter, and whether you needed anything, and I would call him occasionally if I was, working on something to do with the Avs, or maybe something where the Avs had played a team, just his insight was always spot on, but he was always so happy to chat. And even better when you got to run into him in person in a press box or in an arena somewhere and watching practice. And he just, and he was so good with people, and not just, not out of duty. He did it because that was his nature. And, you think, people, I'm sure that there's probably two generations, maybe more, who know him only as an analyst as opposed to a player, which, that sometimes happens as you get older, and people, connect on one level, and they may not even know what a fine hockey player Peter was, but they're going to miss him so much in Denver. And, to me, and, you understand this too, when you work in a marketplace and there's lots of ups and downs, and, the Avs went through a long period of time where it was, what's happening, and, are you ever going to get back in that cycle of winning? And I think it takes a special person to be able to share the stories of a team that may not be vying for a Stanley Cup every year. And I think you have to have the right personality, and you have to, you have to keep engaging with people even when the times aren't great. And I thought Peter did that beautifully. So.
Yeah, when I think of Peter, my short little time doing some things with Razor with the TV thing, and every time we'd walk up, especially in Colorado, he'd pop in say hi to us. The word, I was trying to think of this morning, and the word that came to me was enthusiasm. It just seemed like he was loaded with enthusiasm. So our condolences to his family, and it's a big loss to the NHL community. But I'm sure that they will recover, and they will find somebody to not take his place, but step into that and sit in that chair. So on to you. And I want to know about your journey getting to where you are. I have a special place for reporters because of all the things that just trying to do this side of things where I was always uncomfortable talking to players, and especially players that I didn't play with them. And so I never liked anybody that I didn't play with. And so I don't know how you go about it. So can you kind of walk me through how you got started and your approach, as far as getting the interviews and, getting people to always say yes when you call them and want to do some kind of a piece with them.
Yeah. So you got an hour and a half, right? Like, that's good. Okay.
No, we don't. I got to get on the ice here in an hour and a half. So,
well, my background's probably a little bit different than a lot of men and women who are in the hockey media business. I was a news guy for a long time, covered mayhem. I wrote a true crime book when I was in Toronto. I wrote it with a colleague of mine at the Toronto Sun. It was on a pretty famous Canadian murder case, and
Deadly Innocence, right? Deadly Innocence.
Deadly Innocence. Good call by you. And that was my sort of entry point after doing the book. I really was looking to do something different, and that's how I came to sports. I did a little bit of, I did some football, I did some baseball and stuff, but mostly hockey, really, from about 90. I started covering sports with back-to-back Stanley Cup wins by the Detroit Red Wings in 97 and 98. And I've been doing hockey ever since. So, and I think part of it is, to your question on how do you, the industry has changed so dramatically. I started as a newspaper guy, and then I spent a long time working for internet media companies, ESPN, The Athletic, worked for the Dallas Stars. Obviously, I daily face off. So it's changed a lot in terms of, the kinds of masters that you work for. But I think the job itself is still, it's consistent, right? And maybe it's like the game itself, but you try and build relationships. You try and have, where you have players who trust you and you spend time with them periodically over the years. It's different. Other than the year I spent in Dallas, I covered the Leafs for a couple of years in the Pat Quinn days for the National Post. But mostly my job has been more national. So you parachute into a city and you do some stuff, and then you move on. But those relationships, I think what you try and do is you tell people what you're hoping to do with the story on, what it's about, and you're transparent as possible about what kinds of things you want to know. And if you're having a conversation with someone, I always like to, the best interviews are just conversations. I think of probably the last time I sat down with Sidney Crosby, and it's a while ago now because of COVID, but sitting in the locker room in Pittsburgh, which is where he loves to, he and I've chatted many times over the years. That's the best place for him. And at the end of the day, you're just having a conversation. You're talking about things in the game, and and so you have a conversation. And if somebody says, I don't want you to use that, then you don't use it, right? Sure. Or if it's something, if you say to me, this happened to me, but I don't want you to use that, and then you say, well, could we say it this way, or is there a way, if I called so and so, would that be okay? And I think it's about the transparency, and I think it's about, you just. I think I'm curious, and I like to think that I think like a hockey fan. So what would I want to know? What kind of story would I want to read? And those are the kinds of stories that that I try and follow up. So, and I will tell you this: not everyone says yes. Not everyone wants to talk to me. Well, it's a sad truth.
But you have an easy delivery. I look at you're an easy guy to talk to. You're not in your face kind of thing. Like I like to call you a church mouse, but you have that when you come and talk to you, it's like this easy. Oh well, sure, I'll talk to you, and I think that's the key is you don't throw them under the bus, and I think that's why you continue to get people to do the things with you because you have a reputation for being that way. And you mentioned the word change, and it's one of the things that I was curious about. So doing a piece with a player from the 80s, 90s versus a player today. Is there a change? Because we talk about this all the time, the player today, coaching them and how you need to get your message across to them. And there is no really boot in the ass anymore. It's more about, how you relay the message to them. And that old school way is gone. Is it similar, or do you find any different approach that you have to use in players today versus, again, back to the older guys?
Yeah, I don't. I don't know that you do, and I think I think about having spent a long time. I do provide some content for the Carolina Hurricanes and have for a couple of years, but I spent a lot of time around that team. When I was still at the Athletic, and after Rod Brindamore took over, and so I spent a lot of time around there. And I think of some of the younger players. I spent some time with Andrei Svechnikov when I was still with the Athletic, and just a real treat to be around. And yet, he's part of that young generation that, grew up with the electronics and, grew up in a different way than say, Jordan Stahl, a guy who I've known literally since he and I were talking about it recently. He was 17 years old when he showed up at his first training camp in Pittsburgh. So, different generations really in terms of media, how they deal with media and what the media means to them and what it looks like to them. But I found, like a guy like Andrei Svechnikov is no different in the sense that, you sit down and you're talking, and he came from like a real hard upbringing in Russia. His parents they worked so hard to get he and his brother into the game and, allowed them to pursue it. And, you have those conversations. That conversation is, I think that's universal. And he's proud of his parents, and he's not afraid to talk about where they came from and what they went through. So I don't think those things are different. When you ask that question though, Craig, I was talking to my friend Mark Spector, who lives in Edmonton, works for Sportsnet. He's covered the Oilers for years and years, and recently wrote a column about sort of a change for Connor McDavid and how Connor McDavid feels about his relationship with the media. And the Canadian market's different, and there's been lots of ups and downs in Edmonton since Connor McDavid came in. But just this idea that, and I think this is his 8th year, that he seems more at ease in talking to the media. And like, I don't know if you think back to young stars that you played with, and Mike Modano, or maybe it's hard to imagine Brett Hall ever being uncomfortable with media, but it just seems to have taken a guy like Connor McDavid a long time to get comfortable in his own skin dealing with the media. And I don't know whether COVID plays into that or whatever. When you take the reporters out of the room, it's hard to have those relationships, and it's hard to have, I describe these conversations, and they're all, it sounds like they're all really nice and positive. And I think back to, an incident with John Klingberg the year I was in Dallas in the locker room. He wasn't very happy with something I tweeted. But he and I had that conversation. It was loud to start. But John's one of those guys. He's one of my favorite players. And, I think he and I have a very good, comfortable relationship now. But I don't, if you're not in the room every day, you got to be able to, fix things up if things go off the rails. And things go off the rails if you're in the media, and especially if you're with the team all the time. So yeah, it is a different world. But I do think the same principles, you got to be open. You got to be able to take the heat. You got to be able to work through your differences when they happen, because they will happen. And I think that's the same for any generation. And it may be a little bit more difficult just with the distance because of COVID, and maybe for younger players, they're not used to growing up with reporters and, hanging out all the time.
Well, I'm hearing that it doesn't sound that different, and maybe just the differences with our old guys. You go and meet us and buy us a beer, and we do it in the bar, and maybe here you do it at Whole Foods with this group.
I'm trying to think. I don't think. I don't know. I'm trying to think the last time I went and did an interview in a bar. I'm probably it might have happened, but I can't remember the last time it did. Although I was thinking, I was thinking about this the other day. You were good enough to come on the podcast with me, which we taped at the Swanee House in Buffalo.
I was just going to say we spent some time there, and every song on the jukebox was the band, which I know is your favorite.
But that's you talk about the old and the new way. Listen, yeah. I got the app. I can control the jukebox from wherever I'm sitting.
You're one of them guys, and then you actually pay extra, and so somebody else goes ahead and gets a song, and then you jump their song. I could never understand that.
Not true. I am a full believer in jukebox etiquette. I would never jump the queue. I would never do that.
All right. Well, now you mentioned the Hurricanes, and obviously you're right there with them at times now. I wanted to ask you about Rod Brind'Amour, and he just seems like he's the kind of, well, we know that he's the kind of coach that the players seem like they'd go through a wall for, and he's been known for his fitness, and he takes care of his shape. And I guess you lead by design. I mean, you lead by doing, and it sounds like he's that kind of guy. And it's the reason when you watch the Carolina Hurricanes play, which, by the way, is one of my favorite teams to actually watch, the way they push the pace. And I think there's other teams that are trying to take that lead now, New Jersey Devils being one of them. But a little bit about Rod Brind'Amour, and have you had a chance to sit down with Rod at all?
Yeah, I feel fortunate, and again, this is a function of having been around a long time. I covered. I was at ESPN when the Canes won the Cup in 2006, and spent a lot of time there. Coming out of the lockout, and Jim Rutherford and Peter Laviolette, who was the head coach at the time, really, they really understood how the game was going to change and took advantage. Along with Buffalo. And it took some other teams time to catch up. So I got to know Rod, who was the captain of that team, spent time with him then. And then, over the years, in and out of Carolina doing different things. But, that's a team that went to the conference final in 2009 and then did not go back to the playoffs again until Rod Brind'Amour's first year as a head coach in 2019. And Rod was great. He's always been great with me. I sat in on his first meetings in his first training camp in the fall of 2018 after he'd taken over as head coach. And he not spoken to many times, and so we talked a lot about his career. He actually tried to leave. He was an assistant coach for 6 or 7 years. Never got the opportunity to be the head coach until changing ownership. And he'd applied for college jobs. There were a couple of college jobs he didn't get, or didn't even get interviews because he didn't have a degree. And I think of, what happened if he'd gone to, oh my gosh, I always get them mixed up. Michigan, University of Michigan. Uh-huh. Anyway, if he'd gone.
That's all right. Marty Turco won't be pissed off with that one. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, whatever. One of those Michigan schools. Yeah. I'm Canadian. But the great thing about Rod Brind'Amour, and he signed a new contract. I think before last season, he doesn't want to coach anywhere else. He's not. He wants to coach there. His wife and in-laws are firmly entrenched in the community there. His father-in-law is an iconic basketball coach, NC State. That's his family, right? He's rooted there. He's got a son. He coaches his son. I think he's 8 or 9 years old. And so he coaches him in youth hockey, just as he did his older son, who's playing at Quinnipiac now. He doesn't want to go anywhere else. And I think that's what makes Rod Brind'Amour unique. And his dynamic in Carolina is unique because, at some point he's very candid, right? No coach coaches forever. Right. So at some point, Tom Dundon, the owner, is going to fire him, or Rod Brind'Amour will find he's had enough. But he's not looking down the road to the next job. This is his coaching job. It's where he wants to be. And I think that really, that carries into that room. He's an immensely positive, powerful guy in how he speaks and presents. and that you're right, that it's the old cliche that team would go through the wall for them. And I think that's why, they've had some disappointments. They blew a lead against the Rangers in the second round, losing game 7, really difficult run for them guys. It was a struggle for them. But I do like them, and I love how they play, and they are fun to watch. And he is, to me, I'd spend all day chatting with him because he's just so honest. And this is exactly who he is. Did you play against him? Did you guys cross paths?
Oh yeah. Hard to play against. It appears to me that he coaches like he plays. There's a fire in his belly, and I would imagine that he would be on the ice as a coach, and I can see him running a few players and getting involved in some drills. I just think that's in people's blood. I do it with our U18 team. I don't do it with the pro guys. I'm smart enough to know that that's not going to turn out well. But now also you mentioned Tom Dundon, and Dallas. I don't know if he's originally from Dallas, but I know he was here, and I believe he's from here. It seemed when he came into the league, bought that club, not your traditional owner. Am I close in saying that, or didn't appear to be? You go ahead and take it from here.
No, it's been fun. So twice when I was at the Athletic, I sat in on Carolina draft, in their draft war room. So the year he took over, so the 2018 draft, that's his first draft as an owner. And he's in the room, and he's got the laptops up, and he's asking the scouts, what about this guy? How come you got him ranked here? And Bob McKenzie's got him ranked here. And and then during the lockout, so that's 2020, I think the fall of 2020, when the draft was postponed into the fall, I was in the draft room in Carolina, and it was interesting how much it had changed because Tom is who he is, right? It's his team. He has committed a ton of money. Built a new practice rink. I don't know if you were ever at the old practice rink in Raleigh, but it was a disgrace.
Yes.
He built this beautiful new practice rink. He has spent to the cap, which is something that, with all due respect to Peter Karmanos, that team wasn't a cap team. They were a budget team. And Tom Dundon wants to win a cup. He's going to spend money, but you know what? He's going to have his hands in it. And that's okay. And it goes back to, I think Rod Brindamore has the perfect personality for that. And so does GM Don Waddell, who, Tom Dundon interviewed a bunch of guys about being the GM in Carolina, and for a bunch of different reasons, he couldn't find, it didn't work out. And Don Waddell, who was the GM the entire time the Thrashers were here in Atlanta, was the head. He was president of the business operations there. He had nothing to do with hockey ops, and he'd been there for 5 or 6 years. And so Tom Dundon basically said, "Okay, you're also going to be the GM." But Don's okay. He understands that's what that relationship is going to be like. And between Don Waddell and Rod Brindamore, I think they're able to when Tom Dundon is, suggesting something crazy, and sometimes that happens, they're like, okay, here's why that won't work. Or we can't do that. And I think it's a good relationship. And he is a very different guy. But I will say this about him. I know he's got a wrap around the NHL. He's cheap and blah, blah, blah. Listen, however he spends his money, he never shortchanges what goes on the ice. And again, I think if you see the, deal, he gets a first round pick and picks up, Patrick Marleau's contract from the Leafs. Mm-hmm. He matches the offer sheet on Sebastian Aho. He puts the offer sheet in on Jesperi Kotkaniemi. I mean, these are all things that cost real dollars, but they have helped to put that team in a position where I think they are a legitimate Stanley Cup contender again. And the way they have drafted and developed, they should be in that discussion, for the foreseeable future.
Well, so enough about the team that's paying you. Well,
they aren't paying me all that much, so we can talk about whatever you like.
All right. Well, another team, one of the best teams in the East there, Carolina. There's another team that is at the top over there, being the Boston Bruins. Man, did they get off to an unbelievable start. New coach, Jim Montgomery, former Dallas Stars coach over there in St. Louis. But of recent, a bit of a black cloud or a cloud hung over that club for the last few days, and I think it's still hanging there. Your thoughts on the Mitchell Miller debacle that went down in Boston here?
Yeah, no, I think debacle is a good way to put that. It's just, you know what it does boggle the mind that Cam Neely's the Hall of Fame player and the president of that team, and Don Sweeney's a good, smart hockey guy. And you're right, they built that team with the injuries to Charlie McAvoy and Brad Marchand, and I think Matt Grzelcyk was out to start the season, and the changeover. Chara's gone and Tuukka Raska's gone. Anyway, that team's a really good team, and Jim Montgomery has them playing very, very well. I'm really pleased for Jim Montgomery, and after things didn't things went off the rails in Dallas, and then he got his life back together again and was a big part of Craig Berube's coaching staff in St. Louis, and I'm glad Jim Montgomery has this opportunity. But the handling of the Mitchell Miller thing was just an abomination, and that it's going to. People will move on, in terms of the media, in terms of the story. But what really the unfortunate part is that the person at the heart of this young man, Isaiah Crowley, who was victimized by Mitchell Miller when they were in middle school, and basically has continued to be victimized as Mitchell Miller has continued to try and pursue his goal of being an NHL player. The Arizona Coyotes drafted Mitchell Miller. They never called Isaiah or his family. He rescinded the pick. Boston, the worst part for me is they've been thinking about this since August, and at no point did anyone in that organization think it was important enough to reach out to Isaiah or his family to see how this might play for them. And to me, that's the unconscionable part about it. And Cam Neely acknowledged how they dropped the ball. I think he has reached out to the family since this all happened, but it's too late, right? It's a ridiculous way to have conducted business. Anyway, it is ugly, and I think it's a reminder when these things happen that, we talk about redemption and who deserves a second chance, but, this whole, the running roughshod over the victims and ignoring where they are in these kinds of stories, whether it's the Mayu kid in Montreal or, go through the list of players who have done things. It's really important that we remind ourselves that the victims need to have a say in this. It's critically important. And this was a huge failing by the Bruins. And whatever embarrassment they feel is not nearly enough, because it was handled as poorly as you can imagine it being handled, especially by professional people with a professional hockey team.
And props, though, to the players, the Boston Bruin players that stepped up to the plate, right? I mean, I know that, obviously, I think of two guys, and we always talk about, with all teams, it's a word that probably gets overused, but it's so true, is about the culture of an organization, of a team, of how you draft and how you feel about things. And I look at the couple guys that have been wearing the C there in the past 20-some years, and Zdeno Chara, and now Patrice Bergeron, and come out, and they were, basically said everything that you said. And I just think it speaks volumes for what's inside that Boston Bruins room.
Yeah, you know what? I couldn't agree more. And Nick Foligno is another guy. I've known Nick a long time. It's just always so, he's revered in Columbus, and then he's has a strong connection to Boston because of some illness for one of his daughters, I believe, and had to go through some really serious surgical procedures early on. And he's been selfless in giving back to the medical community and the healthcare providers there. So, but these Bergeron and Foligno, Brad Marchand too, again, a polarizing figure on the ice. But when those guys speak and they talk about culture, it's not just words. It's something they live by. And Mitch Miller does not reflect that. And I would like to think that, and the culture of locker rooms is pretty closed. Maybe this gives players on other teams the courage or at least the knowledge that, you know what, I feel strongly about this issue. I don't care what it is, but I'm not going to stay silent about this. So I'm going to speak my mind. And I agree with Craig. I thought it was tremendous to see their honesty. Again, this was another part of, this all unfolds, teams on the road. Oh, in Toronto, hardly any reporters there. Again, sort of thrown to the wolves by management and ownership that just did not have a clue how to handle this. And I thought the players truly were part of the silver lining to what was an otherwise pretty ugly situation.
Well, and I guess when I mentioned the C in those two guys and what we were talking about culture is that maybe that C stands for a captain, but maybe it stands for character and culture, and that's all part of what goes under that letter that goes on the chest of the guys that wear it. You mentioned the Arizona Coyotes. Have you had a chance to visit their new building and the locker room situation? Have you had that opportunity yet?
No, but you know what? I
are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, I want to get out there. I want to see. They're just coming off their first home victory there. So yeah, and I think I'm really curious. And I have, I go back to covering all of the stuff in Glendale and the dispute. I actually covered a playoff series between Detroit and I think they were called the Phoenix Coyotes then, when they were downtown, and where it was in the old basketball arena, the Great Western, I think it was called, where if you were sitting on one end, the puck would disappear from view. Like the ice was underneath some of the end stands. So you had to, if you had to look up at the scoreboard, if the puck was deep in one of the offensive zones, because you couldn't see the whole ice. And, covering all the garbage out in Glendale. And, it's a reminder of just,
how far we've come.
Have a free arena. There's a reason it's free.
Yeah.
Because it's probably in the wrong spot. And I do hope, listen, it's been a long time. This is Gary Bettman's.
He's going to die on this hill,
onto this franchise, right? Like, so yeah. I hope they get a new barn built in Tempe, because I think there are good fans there. But boy, it's been hard for them, right? I mean, team hasn't been very good, and to drive out. I don't know if you. Well, yeah, of course you did. Well, and you and I both been to that place in Glendale. Yep. It's a million miles from anywhere. You got to drive into the sun for 45 minutes. It's man, the fans who went there, they deserve all kinds of props. And so I hope that they can get into a new barn. And I hope, because I think the way they were building this team, you hope that it coincides that some of these young players are just starting to come into their own. And they've actually played pretty well this season, better than I thought they were going to. And Bill Armstrong's, he's tearing it down to the studs, and Tourigny is a good coach for that young team. So I hope it works, right? I mean, it's been easy to kick them around, and it's embarrassing for sure on some level to play in a barn with 5,000 seats or whatever it is. But man, have some fun. Maybe it's better than playing in a barn, where you've got 6,000 or 7,000 in an 18,000 seat building. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think it's, like I said, I mean, there's nobody that hopes it turns out the right way more than the commissioner, Gary Bettman, because it's a hill that he's decided to live and die on. But I would say for the players, and they do have a young team. They've got some young players there. They got some good players there. And, it sounds like half the building is full of college students. So I'm thinking if you're 19, 20, 21, what better kind of crowd to be playing in front of than that. So I do too. I mean, I hope it works out for them. I've only seen pictures and things of the visitors' locker room, and so I can imagine how the players, the visiting teams feel when they go there. But again, hey, we were in Dallas here. We were, it was very similar to when we first getting started, and it's a process. And I agree, though. I hope they get that building, and I hope they get a team in that can compete. And they're not doing bad right now. They're not in the basement or anything like that. And so maybe things are looking up there for that club. Part of your career has been, man, you've covered the Olympics and the Winter Classics and the World Championships and things like that. Can you talk about, I mean, how difficult is it to go someplace, especially the Olympics, and for 10, 12 days? I can imagine I'm thinking in your head right now, you're probably going, it's not that difficult. I just got to be able to write an article once a day, but there's a lot of sightseeing going on. So, what about those events? Yeah, going to those, and do you have one in particular that stands out for you?
Yeah, no, yeah, those are memorable, and it's true. They are. I did 3 Olympics. I did Torino in '06, and I was in Vancouver in 10, and then Sochi in 14. All were very different. Um, it's I think of Sochi, which was it was pretty zany. Weather was amazing. The place looked great. We I was at ESPN at that point, and Pierre LeBrun and I every day we take the podcast at the end of every day.
That's your running buddy, isn't it? Let everybody know you
my,
and Pierre, you're tied at the hip. You two.
We have traveled some miles together, and the game, like we covered every single game in the tournament. So we're taking podcasts at 2 a.m, and you get on a bus and you get back to your, the media village or media accommodations, and they had these little prefab huts that they set up, and that was the bar, but they stayed open all night, and so we would get back to the complex at 3 or 3:30, and you weren't ready for bed yet, and I think beer was $6 or $8, but you could get a decent, well, not wasn't decent, but you get a bottle of Russian red wine for about $6, and they had this karaoke there, and so you're now it's 4:30 or 5, sleep a bit, get back on the bus, and you're back at the rink for the start of games for the next day, and those things are but to be part of it is those are memories forever. The Vancouver games, that's the greatest hockey I've ever seen. And it wasn't just the gold medal game, although to be there for the gold medal game and Crosby's golden goal and the American team gutting it out and tying it late like that, I'll remember every minute of that game forever and ever. But that tournament was filled with all kinds of crazy games and terrific hockey. And that was, that I'll remember that forever and ever. So those are, you work hard, but it is a grind. And when you get done, you think, oh my God, I don't want to do that again. But then after, you're like, geez, I can't wait to do something like that again. So it's been, to me, that's the disappointing part, of the last 2 Olympic Games in 18 and 22. Without the NHL players, that tournament's garbage. Let's be honest.
Yes.
So I hope, and I know they're talking, World Cup of Hockey, a little bit more than a year. So sometime February-ish of 24, back to what should be a traditional best on best tournament, but it's still not the Olympics. So I hope we get to a point where Connor McDavid and Austin Matthews and, Victor Hedman and all of the, Svechnikov, all those incredible young players get to play on that stage, and the fans of the game around the world get to watch and be part of that, because there isn't anything like it. And we've really missed it the last 8 years. It's been a shame, I think.
I think if we have any young kids listening, they're all going to run out now and try to be a sports writer. From all you're selling it as it's the dream, and I'm sure it is for that. And speaking of dreams, let's talk a little coaching. This league seems to be a league that as soon as things go sideways, it's the coach's fault. And I know that they all know that they're hired to be fired, but I look at, this year, the first 3-4 games, everybody was calling for Lindy Ruff's head in New Jersey, right? And let's fire Lindy, and all of a sudden they're sitting on top of the East. You look at the Boston Bruins, Cassidy, former head coach there, he gets fired, but he goes to Vegas. Now they're one of the top teams in the NHL. Yeah. Monty comes into Boston from Jimmy Montgomery, comes in from Boston, from St. Louis. They're sitting on top of the NHL. Pete DeBoer gets fired from Vegas, comes to Dallas, and up until last night, they were sitting on top of the Central. So what is it about the coaches and the general managers and ownership that as soon as it seems to slide a little bit, it starts going, well, we got to get rid of the coach. And we know the old cliche, you can't fire the players. But what do you think about the coaching carousel?
Yeah, no, it's It's hard. I've been watching pretty closely what's going on in Vancouver too. I've known Bruce Boudreau for 100 years, and I've known Jim Rutherford for a long, long time as well. Jim, who's the president in Vancouver now, no holds barred, talking about how on a recent radio interview about how disappointed he was in his team and their preparation. I was like, wow.
Well, hang on a second. Let me ask you this. So prior to that interview, didn't he have an interview like a week or two ago that he came out and said the coach is going nowhere? It's not the coach, it's the players?
Well, actually, I think it might have been the Ottawa GM Pierre Dorian who said,
was he the one that threw him under the bus?
Going nowhere.
Okay.
And then they played last night. It was like, oh my gosh, both those guys are on the hot seat. And of course, Vancouver won 6-4. So not any easier for DJ Smith. So hey, here's the crazy part. When I left news and I started in sports, I was a columnist at the Windsor Star in Windsor, Ontario, and DJ Smith was the captain of the Windsor Spitfires. So whenever I see DJ, I'm like, man, that was a long time ago. But to your point, like the pressure is enormous, right? And I always say, I think it's always fair. I wrote a column, on my newsletter, Burnside on Hockey, taking a look at, the Leafs came off a terrible Western road trip and they looked kind of junky. And, Barry Trotz is sitting out there. He's a Hall of Fame coach. He's going to coach again somewhere. And I wrote this, and I believe this is the if you're management or ownership and you're impatient and you're disappointed in the way your team is playing, I mean, you have to ask yourself in your heart of hearts, do we have the right guy? Right. So, I go back to Denny Savard got fired 5 games into, I want to say, the 07-08 season in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think he just won a game. They fired him anyway. Anyway, they hired Joel Quenneville. So, at that point, Dale Talon was a GM, and the hockey people had sat down. We were like, I don't know if we can win. And I think we can win with this guy. So to me, it's about what's in your heart of hearts. Do you believe that this is the right coach? And if it is, then suck it up. And who cares what people say in the media or whatever? And if you don't, well, you got to have you got to have a plan B, right? So, so you want to fire Bruce Boudreau, you want to fire DJ Smith. All right, well, who's gonna coach? And let's be honest, Barry Trotz's probably not going to Ottawa,
probably not,
or Vancouver,
probably
right?
not.
Yeah. So, that's the thing. Okay. So if you don't believe in him, who do you believe in? Who is the guy? But there's something to be said for a change of voice and all those kinds of things. But boy, if that becomes your treadmill and your players come to expect, then, oh, well, we play like crap for a while, then I guess we'll get a new coach. Like at some point, it does have to go back to the players, right? Like, you guys suck. So let's work this out. And I think New Jersey is a great example. I'm going to talk to Tom Fitzgerald tomorrow, I hope. And, this is an important season for them. And you're right. If you looked at their first, half dozen games, you're like, geez, this is the same old Devils. Lindy's in the final year of his contract. Maybe there is another option out there. Well, now they're the best team in the Eastern Conference. All those young kids are incredible. And, Nico Hischier, I think is, people don't get how good he is. And Jack Hughes, and that blue line is way better than it's been in the past. So good for Lindy, and good for that, good for them for, gutting it out. And I hope they stick around, and I hope they get to play in the playoffs next spring.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about one team that was expected to be there then, and that's the St. Louis Blues. So let's tie that team, and let's tie it to the general manager. We're Doug Armstrong, Army, been in Dallas here and won a Stanley Cup with us here. He comes out and defends his coach, Craig Berube, and now they're on a 8-game slide. So after you saying the coach isn't going anywhere, what card do you play now? Or do you play now?
I've been thinking the exact same thing, and I love that Doug came out, and it was my sense of it was sort of a preemptive. Hey, I'm going to gather the media. I'm going to deflect some of the attention on me, and let the guys do their things. And unfortunately, they still play like garbage. Like Like honestly, I like that team to be, I think Colorado ultimately, Colorado's the cream. Yeah, look at me breaking news here. Colorado's the cream of the Central Division. But I thought St. Louis would be right there. I just loved how they were built. Craig's a good coach, I think, and they play hard and they're, they lose David Perron. David Perron cannot play anywhere else but in St. Louis, apparently.
He keeps coming back, doesn't he?
And the Blues can't win without David Perron. Anyway, but no, it is shocking to me. And you can, listen, this team is in transition, right? They've got Robbie Thomas and
Jordan Kyrou,
who both have the big deals. Yeah. You've got Ryan O'Reilly and Tarasenko in the final year of their current deals. So like you feel like a team has to evolve, right? There is transition there, but I don't know. They seem to have just lost their way because they can't and they're just, if they were losing, if you lose 6 1-goal games, maybe you think, a little puck luck, but they're really they're getting it handed to them pretty much every night. And I don't know. And I hope, maybe Doug Armstrong just says, well, maybe this isn't our year. And you start to sell off assets and you start to, these people start auditioning for next year. I mean, it's still, we're 20% of the way through. So you get lots of time. The year they won the cup in 2019, they're dead last in January. So if any team knows that it's not too late until it's too late, it's St. Louis. So and it's not too late for them yet. But I'm with you, Craig. To me, that's the most surprising team in terms of disappointment or not being where I thought they would be at this stage.
Yeah, I think that Doug Armstrong is, if not the best general manager in the NHL. He's in the top 2 or 3. I love his approach. I love his demeanor. And credit to another guy that went into the Hall of Fame along with our captain here, Darren Hatcher, Bob Gainey. And I think that Army took a lot of the tutoring and teaching that he had underneath Bo when he was here in Dallas, and he seems to have some of the same, when you talk to him, some of the same answers, things that I would have heard from Bob Gainey. And so I think he's calm, he's cool, he's collected. But I mean, and Berube, didn't he sign like a 4 or 5 year deal? And he's probably in the first or second year of that deal. So, and you're right. I think there are teams and he may be the right guy for looking in the future and knowing Army and where I think he is, he probably could see some of this stuff coming and knew that there was going to be a transition thing and tried to lock up a couple young players who are going to be part of that organization for a long time. So, well, in talking about Bob Gainey, give me your thoughts when you were here in Dallas and, your time that you spent here and the club and where does it surprise you, the coaches that they've gone through and where they're at now, and how do you see the Dallas Stars?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm Pete DeBoer is an old Windsor guy like me, so I'm not surprised that they've had the success early on that they've had. It's an interesting team though, right? I mean, because you still have you got Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn, obviously sort of the old guard now. Jamie's 33, Tyler's 30. But in terms of their the cap hit, that's a big part of the team's identity, right? Because when those guys struggled because of injuries and other things to produce at a level, between the two of them, they're at about $19.45 million against the cap per year. But this isn't really, I don't want to say that this way. It's not their team anymore in the sense that those guys don't drive the bus and don't have to drive the bus. They're important and their leadership is critical. But this is Jason Robertson's team. This is Rope Hintz's team. This is Miro Heiskanen's team. This is Jake Ottinger's team. And I love the pickup of Mason Marchment in the offseason. There's a guy that Carolina felt they had him, and he ends up in Dallas. I think Jim Knowles built a very good team. That back end is real good. I love how this team is built. But it is different, right? Because you got these young kids who are they drive the bus offensively. And so it is it's a team that's a little bit different, right? I mean, because you're top heavy with Tyler and Jamie, but their production is sort of more middle of the pack, but both those guys are off to good starts, and to me, that's why this is a team that I think. I think they're a playoff team, but I think, assuming Jake Ottinger's in good health, man, and we saw this last year, they were way overmatched against Calgary in that first round. And it goes to 7 games because Jake Ottinger is who he is, and he's the real deal. And I just think it's so exciting when you think about that young core and what they can achieve over the next 4 or 5 years. Pete DeBoer, I think Pete DeBoer is a good coach for this team. He's sort of, he's not too high, he's not too low, and he coached a lot of good teams in San Jose, a lot of interesting personalities there. I think it's a good fit for this organization. And when you go to the final in that first COVID year, fans don't get to share in that. So I'd love to see them get on another long playoff run, because that fan base is,
they deserve it.
It's a good one. It's a good one. And it would be great to see them be able to embrace that team on another long playoff run in person, where they didn't get the chance to do it in 20.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, at the event we were at a week or so ago, I got a chance to talk to Jamie a little bit, and Jamie seems to me he's in a really good place, and I think there may be something too to when, if you have the right demeanor, and there's always this talk about the contracts, how much these guys are making. You mentioned Tyler and Jamie, and now maybe when it is kind of like a lot of the load seems to be falling on Jason Robertson and like you mentioned, Hintz and Heiskanen, and so they can just kind of go about their business and just quietly have good seasons, and maybe that contract talk goes away. But I just feel that Jamie, speaking of Pete DeBoer, had a lot of great things to say, and it seemed like the approach that he came into this club. It wasn't going to be overloaded in details and in the game and things like that, which all coaches have those things. But the transition, I think it sounded like it was very easy, and I think they liked the way that he wants him to play. I mean, underneath Bones and in Winnipeg, and that's working well for Rick Bowness in Winnipeg early on. But this is a little bit more puck possession, it looks like, in this team, and they got some skilled players, so they're kind of letting them play the game that they want, and they're having good results. They're a good team, and like you said, Jake Ottinger, as long as he stays healthy, that's where it's always started for me. I want to ask you. So we're only a couple hundred games overall into the NHL. What are we on, game 12, 14, whatever? What do you got in the finals? Give me a team from the West, and give me a team from the East.
Wow. I wish I could remember. I don't know if I did a cup prediction beforehand.
Well, that was probably
like to try
wrong.
And be consistent.
That was probably wrong. And you're going to be wrong here too, right? Aren't we all? We can give you every 20 games, and we're always wrong. What do you got though? What do you think?
I'll go back to, and again, I'm candid about it. I do some stuff for the Canes, but I'm around them. I think I like how they're built. It'll be interesting with Max Pacioretty, of course, who hasn't played. For the Canes, look at me again, breaking news. If Freddie Anderson stays healthy,
yeah,
I think the Canes are a team that may have learned from their mistakes. The East is tough for me though, because again, Tampa is just, you start with Vasilevsky, and they played an awful lot of hockey the last 3 years, but you can't count them out. And I maybe it's recency bias, but I think Colorado is going to be difficult to dislodge. I don't know if you can win a cup back to back with average goaltending though, and that's right. I'm not throwing Darcy Kumper and Pavel Francouz under the bus, but like their goaltending was only okay, but that's all it needed to be. I don't know if you can go back to back doing that though. So I don't know. We could go Dallas, Carolina in the final. I think that'd be an exciting final.
Now you're saying what all the fans want. Now you're trying to take care of the Dallas one because the podcast is in Dallas.
Listenership, my friend.
Don't worry, they're all listening to you, so that's good. There's one team that you overlooked for me. I'm thinking Vegas. I mean, Vegas in the West is going to be tough. This may be a team that's there. The goaltending is another issue there, right? And I don't know if anybody's going to be back there by the end of the season, but they are playing really good hockey right now. And how do we overlook Boston? I mean, they're playing the game without their best defenseman in the lineup in the East, and so maybe maybe that's exactly how they want it. Is everybody to talk about everybody else, right?
Well, I don't see. Well, I don't know how you feel like.
But I know Carolina's writing a check to you every 2 weeks, so I understand.
Which they were right. Well, okay, but anyway, but the goaltending. Like you win a cup, at Belfour, I just think there are so few teams now that like I was doing an interview like this recently, and there's Vasilevsky and Shesterkin in New York with the Rangers. That's another real good team. Gerard Gallant's a real good coach. Are they ready to take that next step forward too? Sorokin's really good. With the Islanders, I don't think they've got enough offense probably, and their blue line is still pretty, meat and potatoes. But like you mentioned Boston, so Linus Ullmark's numbers are off the charts.
Yes,
right? Like it's off the charts how good he is. Mm-hmm. So is that sustainable? I don't know. I think you're right. Boston, Vegas, again, Logan Thompson can you win a cup with Logan Thompson? Sure, I guess you can.
Well, Vegas,
I don't know.
Again, Vegas didn't, have the league's best goaltenders, and they were able to outscore their mistakes. And anyway, I just I don't know. There's something about Vegas.
What's your final then? You give it to me.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. I'd love to see the Dallas Stars there. I just think that getting out of the West is going to be tough. Only because I think Vegas is going to keep kind of rolling here, and maybe the goaltending will be the downfall. And I can't overlook Boston. I just think that I think that situation that happened may have galvanized that team even more, knowing that they stuck together in the locker room, and then maybe I don't know. We'll see. So
I want to ask you. So look at here. I'm hijacking.
You know what we ought to do? I'll tell you what we ought to do. You watch the NFL, right? You watch the Mannings, don't you? Do you watch those two? We could do that for the NHL. We could be the Mannings of the NHL.
I'm up for just about anything.
I'm sure some bar would sponsor us.
But I want to ask you, the one team that, I'm curious about, and I don't know if Edmonton, Edmonton goes to the Final Four. Mm-hmm. They get crushed by Colorado as they probably should have. Is Jack Campbell enough of an upgrade? I don't know. Connor McDavid looks like a man possessed, and Draisaitl, they're both going to be 120 or 125 points. They're unbelievable. Now, Evander Kane's out. He's got surgery.
He might be out a while.
Yeah. But
I don't know about their back end. Yeah. I don't know about their back end. And then I think when you get into the playoffs, I think that there can be good teams. I don't want to say they only have two bullets, and they're two big bullets in Draisaitl and McDavid. But I think over the course of 14 days and 7 games every other night, you may find a way to be able to shut that team down, possibly. Yep. And it might be hard to get out. I'm just saying, I don't look at, like with Colorado last year, all 4 lines were going, and that's why you can, like I said earlier, you're able to live with some deficiencies back there in the goaltender. And I think it's easier for a goaltender sometimes. You're a little bit more relaxed, and you give up an early goal, or you give up all of a sudden you're down 2-0 at the end of the first period. And I'm thinking their mindset is kind of like, you know what, we're going to score 4 goals tonight. So I just got to settle back in. And it might be an easier way for goaltenders to play. But it'll be interesting this year, because I think we're talking about a lot of teams right now that we normally aren't talking about, except for in a negative way. And so hopefully it stays on this path. So, Scott, I really want to appreciate or thank you. And I appreciate you coming on to this show, because you do know everything about the NHL. At least you think you do. But I love listening to you. And have a great time when you get to Carolina. And, we'll be thinking about you here. But thank you very much. And it was awesome having you on.
Yeah, you can call anytime and I will answer. And it's been a ton of fun. It's always great to catch up with you. And let's do it again whenever you're short of body.
All right, man.
Thanks for calling.
All right. Scott Burnside, another episode of Suds with Luds. We're out of here. Thank you.